Retailers are often chided by consumers for gearing up for the holiday season too early. But there's a good reason our favorite stores are pushing goods for the fourth quarter shopping season earlier into the fall. Consumers want it. Hello and welcome to Store Brand Spotlight. I'm Greg Sleater, Executive Editor of Store Brands. With Labor Day fast approaching, it's time to look at the final quarter of the year and gain insight into the wants and needs of shoppers. Joining me today is Zarina Stanford, Chief Marketing Officer with BazaarVoice. With Zarina as our guide, we'll take a deep dive into BazaarVoice's recently released 2024 Global Holiday Season Consumer Behavior Report. Zarina, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Greg, thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it. It's one of my favorite topics as well.
Well, thank you. It's our pleasure. And it's always interesting to see what the consumers, in the summer are going to say about how they're going to shop for the holidays and then see ultimately what they do. So it's always a fascinating time of year. Zarina, as we start, can you give us an overview of some of the key findings in the BazaarVoice report on what consumers are saying there and how they're going to shop for the forthcoming holiday season?
Yeah. So, Greg, if you would allow me, I just wanted to give a little context of why we do this, and we do this on a recurring annual basis as well. Holiday shopping and holiday season planning for brands and retailers are very important, right? Because many of us count on majority of our focus and outcome for the year and for the business being related to the holiday shopping. So one thing that we do a whole lot of is to make sure that we kind of listen to what are the consumers saying and what is it that they are doing so that we as brands and as retailers can kind of, take that consumer lens and so that we can be more relevant, so that we can be more timely and what have you. And just to your intro, thank you again. We actually surveyed about 8,000 shoppers around the world. And specifically where feasible, I'm going to drop in specific, U.S. examples as a whole. Very, very major highlight. I'm just going to say this on an ad hoc basis is that holiday season and holiday shopping is a global phenomenon. Every country that I visit to or every conversation that we look at from a marketplace perspective, every single brand who serves in those markets and retailers always talk about what are we going to do about the retail? I mean, what are we going to do about the holiday seasons? So I'm going to count that really quickly in terms of 5 things, right? Quickly. Number 1 is that, believe it or not, we're here in our time horizon in August. Shoppers are already shopping. There's no doubt there's no too early at all. And I'm going to say, being a shopper myself, I've started mine as well, too. I mean, I can't even bet you have as well, too. The second thing is that this is not really a surprise, and it's continued pattern from last year as well, too, is that online shopping is really outpacing the traditional in-store, traditional store shopping, especially in the notion of shopping. They're just looking for ideas. They're looking for, fit. They're looking for something along those lines. 50% of the shoppers actually say that they still go online to kind of browse and be inspired and, to think about, and they probably have people in mind, but they're still shopping and using that as a discovery. So no surprise in that standpoint. Speaking of online, and as you and I had talked about previously before, social media has really become and taken over in terms of how people are going to find things about products. And if you think about social media, one of the things that is very prominent is videos. And not surprising when we ask the question in terms of the formats of how you would like to learn more about products and ideas, what have you, videos came out first. And they are using video as a part of their social media searching to get, what does it look like? What are the things I may be, maybe this one looks interesting. I may look into that and things of that nature. So I would say that for those listening, if you not already have a plan and a strategy for that, this is probably the high time to do it. I mean, there's no subsequent other time. The interesting, though, is that we did ask the question, and as you know, right here at BazaarVoice, we heavily talk about the, consumer and content creators kind of content. the reality is that when we ask the question about what kind of content do you prefer, do you look at branded content, or do you look at what others like yourselves or influencers and creators are saying, is roughly split in the sense that 43% prefer, 43%, so roughly 4 out of 10 of us would prefer right away to see what other shoppers' content has. Whether it's someone saying about, hey, they try something they like, or they have a video about something that they're wearing and what have you. But the reality is that this is a really interesting part, is that they are absolutely still using brand content to validate. If they see something from a content creator or from a shopper like themselves, if they want to learn more about that product, they do go back to the branded content. So I think that also says that, as retailers, and especially in the private label space, that's even becoming more important. To say, hey, I got to have a right mix of types of content as well as the sources of content. And this is the other piece, is that 13% of those shoppers, this is a global perspective, globally, would actually seek out for influencer content, either because they like to follow them and kind of see what they're at. But the truth is that this is really a phenomenon that is going to continue to rise above. And I think in particular in the space that you and I are passionate about in terms of the store brands, that they are truly looking at that whole composite. Other shoppers like themselves, influencers, and even content creators, as well as your branded content, right? In the branded case, it could be the retailer, it could be the manufacturers and the likes, yeah. Very, really, really interesting, but I would sum it all up is that it really is a global phenomenon. I was just in India last week, and we talked about the India holidays, and everyone surrounds around a lot of their shopping behavior along the threads of holidays.
It's interesting. Zarina, one of the things in there was the 21% of consumers are starting their holiday shopping August or maybe earlier. That's a fifth of us. I guess the big question is, what factors are driving more people to start earlier? Are they finding discounts? Is it just a planning thing? Is it budgetary? Like, what are those factors that are leading people to, in the summer, think about, at least for Christmas, the end of the year?
Yeah. I was thinking it's a combination of two things. One is that shoppers, by definition, are still shopping. So they're browsing and trying to find things to be inspired. And if they see something and they think about someone, whether it's a family member or, friends or what have you, and they say, oh, you know what, this may be something that I could use as a gift, as a holiday, present for that matter. I think that's the one part of it. And one, as you just mentioned, right, that's a fifth, 1 out of 5 of us is already starting to think. I was one of them. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I wasn't really thinking in my head of doing deliberate trip for holiday shopping. But while I was there, I said, oh my God, this would be really great for, Mary. This would be great for John. And that is the part about the inspiration piece of it, right? If they see something, you just hit on something very, very important. And this study actually points to that as well, too, is that if you put a little bit of incentive into that, such as special time discounting and what have you, it absolutely elevates the shopping as well as the buying. Not one moment of doubt on that. So I think this is the one part, is that, if you're in the merchant space, how do I really strategize my overall merchandising strategy, right? What kind of mix and what kind of content do I serve up, and what incentives may I want to? And one thing that you and I talked about in the past as well is that how do I really entice my loyal customers? Because they're always there with you.
Right. So I guess it's not crazy for a retailer, maybe in July, maybe in August, to promote something as just a great gift. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily a holiday gift. It could be a birthday gift or whatever. But if the consumer's already got that thought process, nudge them a little bit.
I love that advice, Greg, because gifting, it has a satisfaction to it. And if you happen to be browsing and shopping and buying something else, and you saw something that, hey, maybe clarify that and in fact promote that as a great gift idea. I think what is really powerful, what you said, is that it doesn't necessarily has to be that mega holiday. It could be thinking about, oh wow, there's somebody's birthday coming up, or there's something, hey, Labor Day, just like you said. Just presenting that use case of being a gift is a very important part of it as well.
The other interesting part, this didn't surprise me as much, was that about half of consumers have started their holiday shopping by October. And given, the way, and especially the last few years where we've seen the Amazons and the Walmarts kind of do their digital promotions in October, that didn't surprise me as much. But knowing that number, how do brands and retailers need to adjust their strategies from a marketing standpoint to make sure that they're catering to these early shoppers?
Yeah, and in fact, if I could just underscore what you just said and add some numbers on top of it, right? So right now, August, let's just say this is the time horizon you're viewing this. And then there is September. And September, just looking at September alone, 3 out of 10 of us are already buying for that mega holiday. Then you take it to October. So if you add up the whole incremental elements of August, September, and October, major part of your merchants or your merchandise is already been either tagged or shopped. And so it only behooves all of us to really think about, as you said, right, how do I really elevate this overall strategy? And on that point, let me just do a substantiation. I was just with a couple of the retailers, and we were talking about how soon do they start doing their planning? And I'll share this with you, and I thank her for sharing that. They actually think about holiday shopping beginning in February. So it's just really amazing. It depends on the number of SKUs that you have. It depends on kind of the fit. And in particular, particularly the vanity gift items, they're gone. And I think this is the other part of the reality and as a strategy, that is there something that you could create to create a bit of a vanity to the point is that if you don't buy it now, it may be gone because there's a limited supply. That's the part of the, if I may use the term, a bit of an artificial, but really creating that sense of urgency. It really, really matters. And so I think that's the one part. The second part is that we've been saying this along. There is never too early to start planning for your holiday placements, your holiday messaging, and as well as what you just said, right? That whole gifting idea.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, I mean, I having spoken with retailers over the years, that fourth quarter planning seems to almost start right after the fourth quarter. January early, they're trying to figure out what they sold and they're starting to plan for, the following, they're now in the new year, but they're trying to plan for the next fourth quarter. So it's almost like a never ending cycle because that window between one fourth quarter and planning for the next year's fourth quarter is almost gone. So
exactly. They just blend, right?
Yeah.
I think there is a reality too, is in the retail space that, unless you're also the manufacturer and the brand, that you can maintain and control your own supply chain and your supply. But the important part is that they have the back end to do. What do I place orders for? What am I going to be promoting, and who am I going to be doing the co-marketing for, as an example? And when it begins to look at that ecosystem, it is a complex planning cycle. So I have to admit that in my head, I said, well, maybe I'm guessing, right, at the time. So maybe April. I said, no, February. Exactly like you said. It just finished. They just finished the book, and then bam, it's time to go.
So the next thing, which is always interesting to talk about, is the journey of the consumer. 50% of those in your survey said they begin their journey online, and there's still about 2 in 10 that want to start at the mall. So what are the implications for the physical retail stores for those who want to, and we use the word shopping, but maybe they're showrooming a little bit and then trying to figure out what to buy. So when you still see 2 in 10 want to start a brick and mortar, what does that mean for those stores that are more focused on brick and mortar than maybe .com?
I think there is only one thing. They've got to think about how to really showcase in a multi-channel or omni-channel fashion. There just isn't another way that could be better, because from a consumer end, from the demand side, they're pushing it for convenience, for online, right? I can look at things on my phone. I can, browse through. I maybe just, happen to have a 5-minute break and I'm going to go browse things, as an example. If you go into the store, you have to kind of plan your trip a little bit. But I wanted to come back to that in a bit as well too, right? So if they plan to say, hey, what can we do as the retailers to say, hey, how do I up the volume, or for that matter, the number of items on the cart as well? And I think that's the one, is that for those that really have the luxury of having a brick and mortar, I think the one important part is to say is that you are actually in control of that experience. And so therefore, make it really enticing to the point that we just talked about earlier. Give a suggestive message that this would be a great gift item. Or this would be a great, or you could do the incenting like we just talked about, is that, right, this is an absolute special, whether, we all know about the Labor Day ones, we all know about the birthday celebration, depending on also the merchandising piece of it. One thing I would want to call out, though, this is really quite important, quite interesting, is that the people who are going to bricks and mortars are not just your traditional suspects. I think, as you saw on the study, is that, no doubt, 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 of the boomers absolutely automatically go to the store. But the reality is that Gen Z are actually going back to the mall. And when I say back to the mall, maybe they haven't been before the epidemics, but the fact is that they now go. And I think part of that, while they didn't deliberately say that in the study, that is their lifestyle. They meet their friends at the mall. They meet their friends at stores now, because more and more things are coming about into in-person. And so I think it's just absolutely, for those who had the luxury, which is why I call that a luxury, to have bricks and mortars and have actual stores, that's a watering hole. You have the actual control of, so make that experience seamless, make that experience fun, and make that experience something that you want them to act. So you got to give them a little bit of reason, right? The reality is that more of us in aggregate browse, as you saw in the study, browse online. But the fact is that when they're really looking and touching and feeling that, they have to do that in store. And there's, in fact, not out of this study, but macro from eMarket Insider, is the fact that the store revenue from stores are on the rise. And in fact, the majority, in reality, still come from in stores, from a revenue standpoint. So I think that it's just absolutely important. How do you deck up the store? How do you put, and where do you put placement? And this is the reality, is that when we walk into, when she and I were preparing for the webinar, we just say, hey, let's go to your store and just have some experience. And she would actually told me where they would put the gift items at easily accessible space, at the right spot, and then also put those merchandise that have been proven to be a very good gift item. It absolutely all works out. So the other part would be the price and promotion, right? At the end of the day, when you're in the store, that's the perfect time for people to just put it in the cart and go, and then check out and pay. And so give them the incentive to go ahead and do it. Now, in an online fashion, we talk about this being contextual commerce, right? You're online shopping and you can give them some social proofing and other elements. You could do the equal same effect when you're in store. Put a little tag, put a little, special red tag of special whatever elements that might be. I think this is going to be important.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. For the growing number of people who are starting their shopping efforts early, and when we use shopping such as a broad term, you get a sense in the survey how many are actually buying versus how many are seeking inspiration and just looking and showrooming a little bit before they actually make that purchase?
That's a really, really great point. The reality is that they are actually buying. And so it's not we call this from inspiration to actual purchasing. In the old days, it may take a little bit longer. But right now, whether you are talking about online shopping, and I'll give you an example of that, or in store, that journey could be very collapsed. Especially, and in fact, the study also points to there are roughly half and half shoppers who are intentional, and the other half is spontaneous. And we can actually, let's only look at the spontaneous. These are the ones that are most elastic and most flexible in terms of wanting to maybe possibly buying. And that's when those inspiration in store or inspiration online is going to convert them from just browsing to actually buying. I mean, 50-50, that's pretty significant, right, in terms of the intention. And like I was saying earlier, when I was at that store, I wasn't an intentional holiday shopper. But you just see something, so, oh, I think I'm just going to go do that. And so they are buying. And so it's not just the process. And in fact, on an online basis, much of the time is that they're actually using that same spot to actually be the shoppable channel. Right? But when we go back to the brick and mortars, right, the actual in stores, you have the cashiers right there. You have the merchandise right there.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess like I said, we talk about shopping, but it's looking and then actually making the purchase. So yeah, that's interesting to get that sense of what people are doing. We touched a little bit just a few minutes ago on brick and mortar stores, and for those that have a substantive and a substantial online presence, and obviously have a lot of stores. How can they, what can they do to enhance maybe the in-store experience to bring more people into their stores versus just shopping online?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked the question. And in fact, I'm going to just cite, so on an annual basis, we actually do a shopper preference study as well. And in that study, which was just 4 months ago, they actually highlighted that as shoppers, they want to have seamless experience, regardless on whether they are on your .com, your social media, or for that matter, at your store. So I think that's the most important thing that I would advocate for all of us who has the ability to pivot one or the other, to make sure that you are giving them a very seamless experience. What I mean by that, and what do they mean by that? In the sense that if I'm looking at this blouse, when I am online looking at it, it would be great to see that blouse being worn by someone. And that person, hopefully, I mean, in some way or another, they can kind of see themselves in it. That they identify with the person they're seeing on the video, right? We were just talking about, right, 58% of the shoppers or those who responded says that they prefer to see videos. And at the same time, when they're in the store, this is where you could do the showroom kind of, you can actually try on and the likes. But in reality, if you can blend that, if they, assuming like what we were just talking about, right, a good 50-60% of it is already going to be doing the discovery or the considering, if you will, online. And when they decide to go ahead and also go to the store, because there's still a good number, right? We just talked about the boomers as well as Gen Z, two opposite ends, are still going to the stores. And at that moment of time, they're going to really make that decision. They are at that pivotal point. For the online merchants, if they're catching people at that point, there are technology as well as capabilities that could present a little bit sense of urgency. So I think we all have experienced that. It's part of what the industry refers to as social proofing, as an example. They know, the online merchants, because it's all digital, they understand what you're looking at. And they could say, because they're connected to the supply, to the CRM, to the supply manufacturing, they're also connected to, maybe on our platform to see what other shoppers are saying about that particular merchandise. That at the right time, you could serve it up to say, by the way, the blouse that you're looking at, we actually have 2 of this size left in this color. And that's the perfect mechanism to say, can I now convert that browser or that looking person to become an actual purchasing that they would click and drag and put that on the cart? That's the kind of tricks, or not tricks, that's the kind of technology that is feasible and available. And from the customers, from the consumer's perspective, they see that as a service. They see that as something seamless, that, hey, you're telling me something that I appreciate, and therefore I'm going to make the decision about that. Not different, if I may make that parallel, not different than when you and I at the store, sometimes you have the salesperson coming and reaching out to you and talking about, like, how can I help you? Or, hey, let me show you something. The online experience and the in-person experience could be very much the same. And with the end game of saying, yes, that person is going to put that.
Zarina, you touched on some of the commonalities between our older shoppers and our younger shoppers in being in brick and mortar. Within the survey, were there other notable commonalities across the generations that retailers should know as they prepare for the holidays?
And great question, and thank you for asking that, because we did dive into, as all the other studies we do, is there something that's different, or for that matter, similar between the generations? So when we look at that, we look at a few categories, few areas. So let me just quickly capture what they are first, right? We look at spend, how much they spend, or what do they want to spend more or less of it, as an example. Second is the effect of discounts. Does it affect generationally differently? And in this phenomenon, everybody talk about AI, we did insert a question to say, hey, you know what, in that element of having, artificial intelligence injected into that, do you react differently depending on your generation? And then we also asked a question about content, right? What types of content that would be more interesting to you? So let me just call that out and just to make sure, right? So we kind of look at generation Gen Z, of course, no doubt. Everybody who is, well, not everybody, those who are born, in the roughly in 1996 and thereabout, right? Seven, I should say. Millennials, boomers, as well as Gen X. So in the spend, the Gen Zs are more likely to spend more on holiday shopping than last year. So 38% difference, right? That's a good delta to say, hey, are we? Maybe the economic condition is improving. Maybe it's other elements, but we'll have to do another study to understand what was the motive of that. But Gen Z is saying is that they're likely to spend more on holiday this year. The Gen X and the boomers, roughly 25% of them, are actually saying, no, we're going to spend less. So I have a little bit of my personal hypothesis. We'll go through that a little bit. It all depends on who is actually funding the purchase, right? And if we could kind of estimate that. And then among those who are in the Gen X, right, which is a little bit on the elder side, 56% of them said that they will spend about the same. So it's really interesting is that if you are a store brand or a retailer who's trying to target on any one, or for that matter, a composite of these generations, something to think about.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, and I could think of reasons why each of them have said what they said, and especially the millennials, because the millennials now are hitting those life moments where it's a house, it's a kid, all of a sudden they've got the expense of life, and they're looking for ways to cut back because suddenly you've got a mortgage payment. So
the reality hits in, right?
Yeah. So and I remember talking about that with millennials 15 years ago when we really started diving into them. And my question, I think we asked where I was working at the time. Well, this is great, but what happens when they? And I don't mean to be pejorative when I say this. But what happens when they grow up? And what happens when they have children and a mortgage? All of a sudden, you allocate your money in a different way when you need, diapers and things like that versus It's just me. So it's always fascinating and it's interesting to see how that generation has grown up, and now watching Gen Z, who does everything in their power to go, I'm not a millennial. So it's just really funny.
Well, what I love to do, Greg, is that if we could, however, because we're respectful of age, I would love to being able to ask the Gen Alpha what they say. But unfortunately, in being legal age and
Right.
what have you, we just couldn't reach out to them. But it would be really interesting to see. And, I think definitely to that extent, right, the Gen X's, the Xers, if you will, they have a little bit more luxury now. And, so they don't see this as a difference in terms of last year, this year, and what have you. They still have the same family. They still have what have you. Yeah, and the friends and the likes. But that was a really interesting and that chiming in. That's great factor, isn't it? We all been there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So
Yeah.
we've talked about some commonalities. Were there noticeable differences between them in what they're going to do for the holidays?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about this particular piece, right? And I'll give you an example of that. When it comes to AI, this is purely a bit of a generational divide. So here's the stats. Here's what it says: half of the Gen X, right, every one of them, and 51% of the Boomers, also roughly half, says that if they know that a brand's social media post is completely AI generated, that's not going to impact their decision.
Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So, in a sense, it's a little bit counterintuitive in terms of the explicit piece of technology coming into play. I would have expected that to be a little bit wider. And then, in terms of the the millennials that we were talking about earlier too, right? Is that this is the whole on the content front, right? If you look at what do they prefer, Gen Xers prefer to have branded content, and we previously already said is that the Gen Zs are actually preferring to say what other people say. It's quite in line with what we're expecting to do, but it's really interesting that there truly is a generational divide.
Yeah. No. And listen, I've got two Gen Z children, and they love their influencers. And and my thing is the Gen Xers going, well, who are these people, and what credibility do they have? So it sounds the same. I'm the cynic, if you will, because I'm a little older, and I'm like, well, if somebody says something, well, what expertise do they have? And the younger consumers are like, well, no, but it's cool. It's
Yeah,
just
well,
cool.
and I think the other part too is really interesting. I also have two Gen Z in my household, and that's the first wave they're going to go to. They go first to influencers and content creators, right? The content creators essentially is influencers too, except they are most of the time they're incented, but they're very articulate. They have deliberate skill in terms of making it fun and humorous and very engaging, but at the same time, they're also learning something about it. And so you have to give them credit. Give credit. We all have to give credit to the content creators.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Zarina, as we look towards the holidays, when you and I have had this conversation in the past, we've seen tremendous growth of private label products across just about every category. What's the role of private label this year in the holidays in terms of what consumers will buy?
Oh, I love how you just put that context. Allow me to I'm going to begin starting commenting as one of the shoppers whom we surveyed, right? Private labels give options. There's no doubt. And you and I talked about the fact is that in the old days, in our when we were children days, that private label was deemed as, not as good as a knockoff and whatever. They are no longer that. And giving and shoppers like ourselves individually having the option to pick and select is a huge part. And we also earlier said that if you put some, time limited offers or discounts into that, is going to drive that decision further along toward purchasing and accelerating the holiday shopping. So in that light, private labels, let's just call that they have a more advantageous cost structure. So therefore, without even discounting, they are more appealing. Depends on how we market it, because the quality is deemed to either be exactly at par or in some cases, actually even better. So I think that I think just as a citizen of the world here, I have to thank the private label manufacturers and to provide that option. That's number one. I think the other piece is that it's also giving more variety. It's giving more choices, right? Related to options, but this is slightly different in the sense that there are things that we wish the national brands would make some modifications to their product, but they're not as nimble in some cases. And therefore, the store brands, the private labels, are actually able to be a lot more tuned in terms of what they're able to serve the consumers on. But most importantly, I think that giving that availability, giving the varieties, as well as giving the flexibility, and equally, if not better, discounting or value for the money. And by the way, I may have shared that with you before too. Value of the money is one of the top 4 most important types of information that shoppers look for when they look at other shoppers' comment or the user-generated content. And that is generationally, universally the top 4. But that's just a reminder, since we talk about a little bit of generational differences, that if I remember the numbers, for the boomers and the Gen Xers, value for the money was number 1, most important thing that they look for. Value for the money was number 3 for the Gen Zs and the early millennials.